The rain fell in sheets, turning the alley into a slick, black mirror that reflected the garish neon of a city that had long forgotten how to sleep. For 10-year-old Finn, it was a river of terror, each puddle a treacherous trap, each splash a gunshot in the suffocating silence between his own ragged breaths. His small lungs burned, a fire stoked by panic. They were behind him. He didn't need to look. He could feel their presence like a cold hand on his neck. The heavy, thudding footsteps of Silas's men were the drumbeat to his own frantic heart. He was a mouse, and the cats were playing their favorite game. He'd been on his own for 2 years, ever since the system had swallowed his parents and spat him out, but he had never felt so hunted, so utterly alone. The streets taught you rules. Be invisible, be quick, never trust a smile. He had broken the last rule with Silas, who had offered a warm meal and a dry place to sleep before revealing the steel bars of his cage. Now, Finn was just another asset to be recovered. He skidded around a corner, his worn sneakers finding no purchase, and slammed into a wall of overflowing trash cans. The stench of rotting food and decay filled his nostrils. He scrambled up, ignoring the sharp pain in his side, and saw it. A dead end. But in that dead end, under the weak halo of a single flickering bulb, was a monster, or a savior. It was hard to tell. The man was huge, a mountain of leather and denim, his back to Finn as he tinkered with the chrome beast parked beside him, a Harley-Davidson that seemed to pulse with a low, guttural growl even when it was silent. Patches covered his vest like a warrior's history, the most prominent being a grinning skull with wings. Hell's Angels. Finn knew the stories. The whispers on the street painted them as devils on iron horses, men who took what they wanted and answered to no one. But right now, the devils you didn't know were better than the ones chasing you. He could hear the shouts from the mouth of the alley. They were close. Desperation was a key that unlocked a courage he never knew he possessed. He ran, not away, but toward the mountain. He tugged on a man's leather sleeve, his small hand trembling. The biker turned, and Finn's breath hitched. A thick, braided beard framed a face that was a roadmap of hard miles and harder fights. A scar cut through one eyebrow, and his eyes, the color of storm clouds, narrowed with surprise. "What do you want, kid?" The voice was gravel, a rockslide of voice that vibrated in Finn's bones. The shouts grew louder. Finn's words tumbled out, a desperate, breathless prayer. "Please," he choked, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "Please be my dad tonight. Just for tonight. Or I'm gone." The biker, whose road name was Breaker, stared down at the trembling boy. He'd seen fear before. He'd seen it in the eyes of rivals, in the faces of men who had crossed lines they shouldn't have. But this was different. This was pure, unadulterated terror, the kind that hollows a person out from the inside. He saw the bruises peeking from under the boy's frayed collar, the gauntness of his cheeks. He heard the approaching footsteps, heavy and purposeful. Not cops. Something worse. Something predatory. He looked from the boy's pleading eyes to the alley's entrance, where 2 brutish figures emerged, their silhouettes stark against the distant city lights. Breaker's decision was instant, forged in a past he never spoke of, a past that had left him with a savage hatred for bullies and predators. He placed a hand, calloused and heavy, on Finn's small shoulder. It wasn't gentle, but it was solid, grounding. "All right, kid," he rumbled, his voice a low promise of violence. "Tonight, I'm your dad." He pushed Finn gently behind his leg, shielding him. "And it looks like I've got some trash to take out." The 2 men, Silas's top enforcers, swaggered forward, smirks on their faces. They saw 1 man, 1 bike. An easy target. "Hand over the boy, old man." The bigger one sneered, cracking his knuckles. "He belongs to our boss." Breaker didn't even flinch. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "He doesn't belong to anyone," he said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "And you're on the wrong street, in the wrong city, messing with the wrong family." He reached down, not for a weapon, but for the starter on his bike. The Harley roared to life, a deafening explosion of sound that shook the very bricks of the alley. It wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. The 2 thugs hesitated, the sheer volume and ferocity of the sound momentarily stunning them. In that split second, Breaker moved. He wasn't just a big man. He was impossibly fast. The first thug found his wrist caught in a grip of iron, twisted at an unnatural angle that elicited a sickening crack and a scream. The second lunged, only to be met with a single, precise punch to the throat that sent him staggering back, gasping for air he couldn't find. It was over in less than 10 seconds. Breaker stood over the two groaning men, his chest rising and falling slowly. He hadn't even broken a sweat. He turned back to Finn, who was staring, wide-eyed, at the scene. He gestured to the bike. Get on. Finn didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled onto the seat behind Breaker, wrapping his thin arms around the biker's massive torso, burying his face in the worn leather that smelled of rain, engine oil, and something else, safety. With a final, thunderous roar that served as a warning to anyone else who might be listening, the Harley peeled out of the alley, leaving two broken men and a lifetime of fear behind in the rain-slicked darkness. They rode through the city's glistening veins, the engine a defiant roar against the night. Finn held on tight, the vibration of the machine a steady, reassuring heartbeat against his own. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't running. He was being carried away. The clubhouse was tucked away in an industrial district, a nondescript brick warehouse that gave no hint of the world inside. The moment Breaker cut the engine, the sudden silence was almost as loud as the previous noise. He helped Finn off the bike, his large hands surprisingly gentle. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer, cigar smoke, and leather. Dozens of men, all clad in the same patched vests, turned as they entered. Laughter and loud conversations died down, replaced by a questioning silence. 41 pairs of eyes, ranging from curious to suspicious, landed on the small, drenched boy standing beside their president. A hulking man with a beard even bigger than Breaker's, a patch on his vest that read Grizz, was the first to speak. Breaker? What's this? Did you pick up a stray? Breaker guided Finn toward an old leather armchair near a pot-bellied stove that radiated a welcome warmth. This is Finn, he announced to the room, his voice leaving no room for argument. Tonight, he's with us. He's under our protection. He turned and fixed his gaze on Grizz. Get him something dry to wear and some hot food. Now Grizz, the club's sergeant-at-arms, didn't question the order. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of the seriousness in his friend's tone, and disappeared into a back room. The other bikers watched, their expressions shifting. They were a hard crew, outlaws by choice and reputation, but there was a code. Their battles were with rival clubs and the law, not with children. They saw the boy shivering, saw the dark circles under his eyes and the defiant set of his small jaw. In him, many of them saw ghosts of their own troubled pasts. Grizz returned with a club t-shirt that hung on Finn like a tent and a steaming bowl of chili that smelled like heaven. Finn ate ravenously, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the sea of tattooed, bearded faces. He wasn't scared anymore. These men were intimidating, yes, but their power felt different from Silas's. It was a contained storm, a strength held in reserve, whereas Silas's power was a wildfire, consuming everything it touched just for the sport of it. After he finished eating, wrapped in a thick wool blanket someone had draped over his shoulders, Breaker sat down opposite him. You want to tell me who you were running from, kid? Finn hesitated, the memory of Silas's cold smile making him flinch. He remembered the day they met. Finn had been trying to lift a wallet in a crowded market, clumsy and desperate with hunger. Silas had caught him, but instead of turning him in, he had bought him lunch. He talked about a big house where kids like Finn were looked after, where they had beds and all the food they could eat. It was a lie, a beautiful poison apple. The house was a training ground for a crew of child thieves and lookouts, run with iron-fisted cruelty. Any mistake was punished. Any attempt to leave was unthinkable. He looked at Breaker, at the quiet intensity in the man's eyes, and decided to trust him. A man named Silas, Finn said, his voice barely a whisper. He finds kids with no one. He says he'll help, but he doesn't. He makes us work for him, stealing other things. If you don't do what he says, he trailed off, pulling the blanket tighter around himself. I saw him get really mad at another boy. I got scared. I ran. A low growl rumbled through the room. It wasn't one man. It was a collective sound, a chorus of 42 predators who had just heard the cry of a wounded cub. Grizz slammed a heavy beer mug down on the bar, the sound cracking like a whip. A ghoul who preys on children, he spat, his voice thick with disgust. In our city, Breaker's face was like granite. His own past was a closed book to most of the club, but Grizz knew. He knew about the younger Brother Cole. The man who became Breaker had lost to the streets, a boy who had fallen in with the wrong people and vanished forever. Protecting this boy wasn't just about the club's code. For Breaker, it was a chance to fight a ghost he'd been chasing for 20 years. "He won't touch you again, Finn," Breaker said, his voice a solemn vow. "Tonight, this clubhouse is your fortress, and we are your family." The words hung in the air, heavier than the smoke, more solid than the brick walls. For Finn, a boy who had never known the meaning of the word family, it felt like an anchor in a raging sea. He looked around the room, at the faces of these rough, dangerous men, and for the first time, he saw them not as monsters, but as guardians. 42 of them. His guardians. The night deepened, but inside the clubhouse, a plan was being forged in righteous fury. Scouts were sent out. Quiet calls were made to contacts in the city's underbelly. The name Silas was spoken into phones in hushed, urgent tones. Information began to trickle back like a dark stream. Silas wasn't just a petty gang leader. He was a key player in a much larger, more sinister network, one that specialized in trafficking the vulnerable. He operated with impunity, protected by money and fear. He considered himself untouchable. That was about to change. He had made the fatal error of chasing his prey into a dragon's den. As the bikers prepared for war, a strange sense of peace settled over Finn. He was given a spot on a worn-out couch, and Grizz stood watch nearby, cleaning a shotgun with methodical, menacing slowness. Other bikers came by, one by one. They didn't say much. One man, whose knuckles were tattooed with the letters HARDLUCK, silently handed him a comic book. Another pressed a bar of chocolate into his hand. It was their way. Actions, not words. Finn eventually drifted off to sleep, lulled by the low murmur of voices and the comforting rumble of a Harley being tuned in the adjoining garage. He didn't dream of running. He dreamed of flying, shielded by giant, leather-clad wings. The first sign of trouble came just before dawn. One of the lookouts radioed in. 4 black sedans, no lights, moving slowly down their street. Silas had found them. He wasn't coming for a quiet negotiation. He was coming to make a statement, to reclaim his property and punish those who had interfered. Breaker's voice cut through the quiet clubhouse. It's time. There was no panic, only a calm, deadly readiness. Men grabbed chains, knives, and heavy wrenches. They moved outside, melting into the shadows around the warehouse, becoming a part of the pre-dawn gloom. They were not brawlers. They were soldiers defending their territory. Grizz gently shook Finn över. "Stay inside, kid. Don't open the door for anyone but us. Understand?" Finn nodded, his heart pounding. He peeked through a grimy window as the sedans pulled up. Silas stepped out of the lead car. He was tall and wore an expensive suit that looked out of place in the gritty industrial landscape. He radiated a slick, corporate evil. A dozen of his armed thugs fanned out behind him, confident in their numbers and their firearms. Silas smirked, looking at the seemingly quiet warehouse. He thought he had them trapped. He gestured for his men to move in. As they stepped onto the property, the world exploded. 42 Harley-Davidsons roared to life in unison, their combined sound a physical force, a tidal wave of mechanical fury. Headlights blazed, turning the dark street into a stage. From every shadow, a biker emerged, a wall of leather and chrome and righteous anger. Silas and his men froze, their confident swagger vanishing instantly. They were surrounded, hopelessly outnumbered. They had brought guns to a war of spirits, and their spirits were weak and cowardly. Breaker stepped forward, the streetlights glinting off the chrome of the massive chain wrapped around his fist. He walked right up to Silas, who was visibly trembling. "You came for the boy." Breaker's voice was unnervingly soft, yet it carried over the roar of the engines. Silas tried to bluster. "He's mine. He's an investment. This has nothing to do with you. You're wrong," Breaker said, his eyes burning with a cold fire. "You brought your filth to our doorstep. You preyed on a child. That makes it everything to do with us." He didn't wait for an answer. The fight was a blur of motion, a controlled, brutal ballet. The bikers moved as one, a pack of wolves descending on cornered prey. It wasn't a battle. It was a reckoning. Silas's men were disarmed and dismantled with terrifying efficiency. They were thugs, used to bullying the weak. They were no match for men who lived and breathed combat. Breaker dealt with Silas himself, a single, devastating blow sending the trafficker to his knees. He didn't kill him. That would have been too easy. Instead, he leaned down, his voice a venomous whisper in Silas's ear. "We know who you are. We know what you do. We're going to burn your entire network to the ground. But first, you're going to feel a fraction of the fear that little boy felt from inside." Finn watched, not with fear but with awe. He was watching justice, raw and unfiltered. He was watching his family fight for him. By the time the sun began to cast its first gray light over the city, it was over. Silas and his men were bound and gagged. An anonymous call was made to a detective known to be one of the few good ones, detailing the location of a major human trafficking ring, complete with a list of names and evidence collected by the club's network. Justice would be served one way or another. The bikers returned to the clubhouse, bruised and energized. The roar of their engines was a victory cry. Breaker walked in and went straight to Finn. He knelt down, so they were at eye level. "It's over," he said. "You're safe." Tears welled in Finn's eyes. But for the first time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of relief, of gratitude. He launched himself at the big biker, wrapping his arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Breaker, a man who hadn't shown such vulnerability in decades, hesitated for a moment before his own powerful arms wrapped around the boy, holding him close. A cheer went up through the clubhouse. The 42 hardened outlaws, the Hell's Angels who the world saw as villains, stood as witnesses. They hadn't just won a fight. They had reclaimed a soul. That night, a boy who had no one begged a stranger to be his dad. He got more than he could have ever dreamed of. He got a father, an uncle named Grizz, and 40 more guardians on iron horses. He got a family, and they, in turn, were reminded of what their patches truly stood for: loyalty, brotherhood, and the unwavering defense of the innocent against the wolves of the world. Remember that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather and ride Harleys. If you believe in the power of brotherhood and standing up for the vulnerable, share this story. Let the world know that even in the darkest alleys, angels are watching. And support organizations that help children find their way off the streets and into safe homes.